title, Economy First, a doctrine of economy first by the UAE. How did you coin this phrase? And say a few words about what it means to you.
Danny, thank you. Thank you for having me. And it's great to work. It was great to work with you and your excellent team on this report. Here's where the economy first doctrine term came from. I was reading the projects of the 50 initiative. They laid something out that really caught my eye. And I'm just going to read to you very quickly. In the principles, they said, the Emirates foreign policy is a tool that aims to serve our higher national goals, the most important of which is the Emirates' economic interests. So that really jumped out at me, that they're putting the economy first. And then what we saw over the past year, those of us who watch UAE foreign policy, we saw some quite significant developments. We saw some détente and normalization with countries that were recently seen as adversaries. So you put all of these things together, and the UAE foreign policy and the stated goals from the projects of the 50 and some of the public statements from senior UAE officials was kind of leading us in this direction. And so I came up with this term, the economy first doctrine.
That's outstanding, Afshin. And as you know, and I know, we've heard this from a number of Emirati leaders over the last couple of years, and especially coming out of COVID. Since the beginning of COVID, the UAE has been planning and thinking about what they do next when COVID starts to recede, and how they bring their economy on the world stage as an even greater force than it was before. You talk in your report a lot about tailwinds, but you also raise some headwinds that we might face. As far as this concerns business and trade and commerce, talk a little bit about some of the headwinds and some of the things that our listeners should watch out for.
Sure. When I look at some of the headwinds, particularly the macro headwinds, I mean, whenever you look at the international relations environment today, you have to start first and foremost with the U.S.-China competition. A U.S.-China great game / Cold War, whatever you want to use, is playing out, and it is robust. So it puts a place like the United Arab Emirates sometimes in uncomfortable positions. After all, the United Arab Emirates is a major source of foreign direct investment from China. It is a major trade hub, and China trades a lot via the United Arab Emirates and with the United Arab Emirates. But I think the key point here is that because the UAE is a major trade hub globally, trade hubs tend to attract a lot of trade. But having said that, there have been some very uncomfortable conversations with UAE officials and US officials over China, and that's a space we're going to have to watch. Secondly, we're going to have to watch this space of the global economic recovery. The World Bank just put out a report, said we're headed for a sluggish recovery. The major economies like China and the United States are headed for deceleration. And if you're a place like the UAE that thrives on a global economy that is thriving, then that's a significant headwind. Thirdly, what we're seeing is the rise of competition. Saudi Arabia is emerging as a significant regional competitor. It's trying to position itself as a trade hub. It's trying to position itself as a place that would attract a great deal of investment. And then the fourth headwind is we're likely to see more regional unrest in the region. Some of the same conditions that existed in the Arab uprising still exist today. So we're likely to see more regional unrest. And finally, the one that has made the headlines is the Houthi attack in Abu Dhabi. Attacks like this obviously have a chilling effect on business. And so that's a space to watch as well.
The UAE is positioning itself as a global hub for the future and not just a regional one. You and I have talked about this. You believe that the UAE is very much already a global hub, but it really is by the year 2030, it wants to come out onto the world stage as a major power center in the world. Give 3 or 4 or 5 examples of elements of the project of the 50 that are going to enable the UAE to achieve that goal.
Danny, I think that one of the things that we've seen in the projects of the 50 is this attempt to retain talent. So what were all sorts of visa programs that would aim to retain talent, golden visas that would keep people for 10 years and beyond, even nationality programs. And then we're seeing this attempt to cultivate national talent, Emirati talent. A lot of money is being spent on that. And When you look at the history of nations that succeed, oftentimes they are undergirded by this foundation of talent, and the ability to attract talent and to cultivate talent is vital, and the UAE seems to be pushing in that direction. And secondly, the UAE already is a major trade hub, and so they have this first mover advantage. A country of less than 10 million people does more international trade than Indonesia or Brazil, countries of 200 million people plus. So when you have that scale, you have that first mover advantage, and you have the infrastructure, as soon as the global economy begins to recover more robustly, as soon as trade begins to recover more robustly, you are well positioned. And then the third thing from the projects of the 50 that I would point out is when you look at some of the things that they are targeting. They're targeting fourth industrial revolution technologies. They're not sitting back and saying, "Oh, we're already a logistics hub and an aviation hub and a tourism hub." They're saying, "No, we're going to go for next generation technology businesses," and they are allocating a great deal of funding to build those kind of businesses.
And they're reforming all of their business practices, the ability for American companies, other foreign companies to come set up and do business and be 100% owned. They're creating best practices in their rule of law and implementation of new digital law. So really taking a lot of steps here to position themselves for the future. Afshin, we really appreciate you being on today, and I hope we can have you back.
Thank you, Danny. It's always a pleasure to speak with you.